Hey guys, if you've been on ladder recently with the new expansion, you've probably seen a lot of the new Secret Paladin. It runs the very powerful card Sword of the Fallen. After your hero attacks, cast a secret from your deck. What this enables your deck to do is get all these 1-mana secrets, which are normally weaker cards because they're only 1 mana, so you run out of stuff. But with Sword of the Fallen, you're able to pull them for your deck. So you're able to run all these cards and then these low mana cards and get them for efficiently. So this 2-mana card effectively is 3 secrets and 3 1-damage hits with a weapon. So incredibly strong. And that has gotten people in a spot where realizing playing around secrets is hard. Figuring out what order do I proc, because sometimes, especially with Sword of the Fallen, it's a random secret. But because it's a random secret, we can often do very mathematically precise plays to see, because it's random. So there's 4 major secrets that are being run. If you're playing the Libram version, it's less, but the 4 secrets that are being run are Galloping Savior, Avenge, Oh My Yogg, and Noble Sacrifice. Most lists are not running the Reckoning card. That card has not quite made the cut. That is a 5th secret, but that very few players run. So in general, if you're playing on ladder, unless you have a certain read you've played against this opponent before and they've run Reckoning, don't worry about that card. But with the 4 cards, we're gonna think, okay, what are the likely plays and how do we play around them? Noble Sacrifice is one of the easiest ones to play around because it's just kind of a thing of, we know that the first minion that attacks, it will when we attack, the Noble Sacrifice will happen, and then so it has a 2/1 defender to put at the new target. So if you're going face or going attacking a minion, it will attack the 2/1 instead. But this one usually isn't that big a deal, but when combined with Avenge, your opponent can make it so even if you go face, the Noble Sacrifice blocks it, and then the Avenge minion, the Noble Sacrifice dies, and then another minion gets +3/+2. That's the effect of Avenge. When one of your minions dies, give a random friendly minion +3/+2. So what does that mean? Sometimes you can't even go face if you have 2 secrets. 2 secrets get complicated. So, but in general, Noble, we put our 1/1, we attack with like a 1 attack thing first. So for Avenge, if we know our opponent has Avenge out, what we want to do is, and it doesn't matter unless they have Noble Sacrifice or 2 minions, we want to kill one of the minions first and then have a play to kill the bigger minion. So for example, with Mage, you might ping off a 1/1 and then have Devolving Missiles ready. If you're playing Rogue, you might weapon hit off the 1/1 and then do a Prize Plunderer play, where you Prize Plunder Shadows the Prize Plunder to kill off the minion. That's the great way to play around Avenge. Often, if you think your opponent has a good chance of having Avenge, you don't trade off their minions because the risk of Avenge is too much. Galloping Savior can make this all really complicated. So, but in general, Galloping Savior, we play around by only playing up to 2 cards a turn. So sometimes you want to be thinking about your turns at the beginning and thinking, how can I play around? How can I do a play that only does 2 cards or less? So you might do something that isn't optimal. Maybe you go first day of school if you're playing a paladin yourself, but only play 1 of the minions, even though you want to play 2, because the Galloping Savior is too risky. So and then the final secret is Oh My Yogg. Oh My Yogg is an incredibly powerful secret. Whenever your opponent casts a spell, they cast a random one of the same cost. So this one is, at first glance, it looks like just counterspell for 1 mana because it gets rid of the spell. But it's so much more than that as a card. Sometimes this effect makes it better, but sometimes it makes it worse. So to play around Oh My Yogg, we want to be not only thinking, okay, proccing often if we can with a spell that that isn't important but sometimes we don't have that luxury. So one of the things we can do though to play into Oh My Yogg is understanding what Oh My Yogg, the random pool. So I did some analysis on 0, 1, and 2 mana spells. So 0 mana spells are one of the best. There's a very small pool of spells, only 13 spells, and some of the cards that are included. One is Sigil of Silence, which is the Demon Hunter card. Start your next turn, silence all enemy minions. This is really useful, especially against Paladins, because often they have buffed minions. So by getting a Sigil of Silence, next turn it will remove all those buffs. There also are three different plays that give you mana effectively. Innervate, Lilac Bloom, and Preparation. So sometimes you use the coin, for example, to play around Oh My Yogg, and you get the mana anyways. We also have 2 cards that kind of work as removal. We have Pounce and Backstab. So these cards are single target, so if your opponent has a removal card, and that can help us. And finally, we have some other cards, but like we have some sacrifice cards. We have Raise Dead that can give us our mag cards back. We have First Day of School that can give us some 1-drops. So we have some value generators. But in general, so what we're getting is a few value generators, a few removal, and a few mana. So 0 often is because of limited outcomes, you can kind of say, you know what, most of these cards aren't that bad for me. It gets a lot harder when we go to higher manas because there's a lot bigger of a card pool. But I did some general analysis. So if you're going to do a 1, 2, or 3 mana cost card, here are some of the most common cards you'll get it. So for 1 mana, one of the most common types of cards is single target removal. Think of cards like Smite or Sword and Board. So this is the thing if you play a 1 mana card and it's really good if you don't have any minions on board and your maybe opponent has 2 minions. Often you'll get a single target removal that will hit one of your opponent's minions. Another really common thing is resource generation. So there's all the study cards, the demonic studies, the nature studies. So because of that, you can often say, well, I can play a 1 mana card and I might get a card. So I might get another minion. I might not get to play. That can be really nice. There also are 5 Paladin secrets, but those are some of the most common ones that you can get for 1 mana. So think, okay, if single target removal is about 1/4, and same thing with resource generation. So 1/4 the time you might get a single target removal, 1/4 you get a resource generation card. There are other cards, and also you can get Paladin secrets. So that's something to be thinking about when you're going for a 1 mana card, to think, okay, is this something that I'm happy playing into Oh My Yogg? Because let's say if you would really like a single target removal card, if Smite would just be fantastic, and like I said, there are lots of cards kind of like Smite. There are cards like Sword and Board. There are cards like Unstable Fellbolt. So because of that, you can use the 1 mana to intentionally remove the minion. So next, for Oh My Yogg, we have 2 mana cards. 2 mana cards also have a lot of single target removal. There's a huge amount of pools. There's around over 70 2 mana spells. But we have a lot of single target removal. I have 10 of that. So you have about a 1 in 7 to get a single target removal. But we also have a lot of card draw. There are a lot of 2 mana cards that are draw cards. Think Cram Session. Think cards like Guess the Weight. A lot of those kind of cards. So because of that, you're often getting a card draw. So if you could use more cards, often it can be nice to play a 2 mana card because, maybe if you're happy to draw another card, that might be a good outcome. There also are a huge amount of secrets. So there you have both rogue secrets and hunter secrets. So because of that, if you wouldn't mind a secret can be really annoying for your opponent because they might think, I have no idea what the secret is. It's just completely random, and that might mess up your opponent. We also have at 2 mana a lot of buffs. 11 cards of buffs. Think Hand of Adal. Think cards like Power Word Feast. These cards are very common at 2 mana. So it often can be a good thing that, like, let's say your opponent doesn't have minions on board, but you do, and you want to play around Oh My Yogg, 2 mana can often give you a buff. However, this makes it quite scary if you're playing a 2 mana card when your opponent has board and you do not. So it's a little bit riskier because often you might buff up one of your opponents, but your menu you get Powered Feast and it happens to hit your opponent's 1/1 Divine Shield, Righteous Protector. That's going to be really tough to deal with. So anyways, those are some of the most common kind of cards. So remember, 0 mana, we have a lot of mana. It's probably the most ideal because we have a lot. One, it costs 0 mana, so it doesn't lose you as much tempo, the card you're playing. But we also often get mana. We often get single target removal, and we often get some resource generating, things like First Day of School and Raise Dead. For 1 mana, we often get a resource or a single target removal. So often 1 mana can be a really good card to play around. 2 mana is often nice when you need value or when you have board, but can be risky when your opponent has board because there are a lot of cards that buff, and if your opponent has more minions, often one of the minions will get the buff. But so anyways, that's Oh My Yogg. So how do we deal with now? We've learned about Noble Sacrifice. We've learned about Oh My Yogg. We've learned about Galloping. We've learned about Avenge, and we've learned about Galloping Saviors, right? Galloping Savior. And we've learned kind of the basics, but when it gets complicated is when we have multiple cards to interact with. You throw on top of it a card like that's run in the Secret Paladin. Your opponent has a Crossroad Gossiper, and it can get really complicated really fast because if your opponent you activate one of the secrets, the Crossroad Gossiper, after a friendly secret is revealed, gain +2/+2. So what does that mean for you? You need to be thinking about how you're going to remove this buff minion. Now, so in general, what are some common combinations of secrets? One is maybe Oh My Yogg and Avenge. So if our opponent has 2 minions, Oh My Yogg and Avenge, often we're in a spot where the problem is we might want to use a spell to remove a minion, but the spell might get Oh My Yogg. This puts us in a risky scenario. This is one of the toughest combos. Noble Sacrifice and Avenge is a combo that often your opponent will do when they have a minion, and then they will play a minion on board. And it looks like, oh, you don't have to worry about Avenge, but then the Noble Sacrifice happens. So sometimes when you think, if your opponent has 2 secrets down and they have 1 minion, you think, how likely is it Noble and Avenge? So, for example, let's say you attacked the previous turn and it wasn't Noble. Well, you know it's not Noble for the previous one, but maybe they did another weapon hit. So now they have 2 secrets. So the previous one could be Avenge, but that makes it less likely it's Noble Sacrifice and Avenge because there was a 1 in 3 chance it was Avenge last time. So and then there's a 1 in 3 here. So because of that, there's only about a 1 in 9 there that it's Avenge Noble. But if you haven't hit face, so you haven't procced a test for Noble Sacrifice or Avenge the previous turn, that makes it far more likely because there's a 50% chance on the first one, and then there'd be a 1 in 3 chance on the second one. So you would look at it, and there would be about a 1 in 6 chance that your opponent has that combination. So that becomes something a little bit more noteworthy that maybe you should play around. So Galloping Savior is also a very tough one. Often we might want to play a certain combination of cards and trade some minions in, but if we do it, we might forget, and all of a sudden the taunt comes in, and the minion that got avenged, all of a sudden we can't kill because there's a taunt in the way. I've had that happen on the other side. So we need to be thinking about that is, what if it's a Galloping Savior? So ideally, though, the way we play around Avenge, the most ideal way is we want to get as many buffs on one minion and then use a single target removal card like Devolving Missiles, like Prize Plunder, like Shadow or Death, and then we can use those cards to kill off the minion. So next I want to talk about how do we deal with Crossroad Gossiper. This card is very strong. If you played against it, you've probably seen it get buffed to as high as a 10-9 You know, your opponent gets 3 secrets all at once, maybe even gets an avenge on, and all of a sudden is a 12-11. And it can go from this very innocent looking 4-3 to incredibly strong. So this is another card that we want to be thinking about. Okay, what are their likely secrets are? Our opponent will often be playing the weapon and setting up the secret. So one, if we don't have the removal, we obviously want to hit that first. The biggest weakness of that is that if we attack into it and they have noble, which they'll do often, it might go in. So we want to be thinking about like how likely is it that they have noble. That's why it can be nice if often your opponent plays a weapon. Let's say you played a 1-3, you might have been able to proc for noble. So when they plop this down, it makes it less likely they have noble, depending on how many secrets they have. So like I said, so because of that, if your opponent had 1 secret down and they went with a weapon hit, they have about a 1-3. So if you have like a 3-2, let's say you have a flame imp on board, it might be worth it to go for the risk and trade in the Crossroad Gossiper. However, it's not that simple, because why did your opponent play the Crossroad Gossiper? It's often a tell that they may have gotten the noble sacrifice. So that's why they're kind of playing it and trying to bait it. So you want to be thinking about, why is your opponent doing the plays? Did they get a certain secret? Next, I want to talk about when your opponent hand reading with a secret. So often when our opponent uses the weapon, it's random. It's randomly pulling out from their deck, so we can't really judge. But often if our opponent does certain actions, it does certain plays, it's really indicative of what secret they play. A really good example is if you're playing a mage and your opponent plays a secret that they kept. So they kept a card, you notice they kept a card, and they're on coin and they play a secret. Well, that's a very good chance on one that it's Oh My Yogg. Why would they keep a secret? It's not a generally good card to keep except for Oh My Yogg, and generally the Paladin wants to be playing a 1-drop on one. So the fact that they played a secret on all their plays makes it very likely to be Oh My Yogg. So because of that, maybe you have an Incanter's Flow, you have a deck of Lunacy, but maybe you have a Primordial Studies, you might play the Primordial Studies to play around that. But there is a risk of it, of always them go. But for example, let's say they went weapon instead, let's say they went coin weapon, you're less inclined to play around the Oh My Yogg. Why? The problem is if you play around it, or if you go Primordial Studies, they just hit a weapon the next turn, and now you have to play around it again. So sometimes you're just better off going for it. But when your opponent plays a card that they kept in their hand and doesn't play a 1-drop, that's a very strong tell. Another tell for Avenge is when your opponent plays 2 minions on board, or doesn't trade in the spot they normally would. So let's say you have a 3-1 and they have 2 1-1s, and normally opponent would trade into a 3-1. Well, let's say they don't. Well, that often means they have Avenge. Why? Because they actually want you to kill off one of their minions so that they can buff it up and get more damage. So that's a time of, okay, well, it's likely to be Avenge here, so I am probably not going to trade unless I have a way to kill the Avenge minion. You know, next, I think, so Galloping Savior is one of the harder ones to read. Usually it doesn't have as much of a tell, so it's generally it's a thing of it's literally less priority. So your opponent, if they're playing a secret, it's less likely to be Galloping Savior unless they don't have another good play. So if they play a secret and float mana, something like that, it looks like they just have an awkward hand, you might think they have Galloping Savior. And Noble is a big tell when often if they play a secret and you have a 2-health minion where they want to protect a minion. So, for example, we talked earlier about playing around, or when our opponent plays the Crossroad Gossiper, our opponent might play Noble and the Crossroad Gossiper together, so it's harder for you to kill that Crossroad Gossiper. So Noble and Oh My Yogg are a really deadly combination with Crossroad Gossiper, because even if you have a 3-attack minion, you can't attack. If you play a spell first, the spell, like let's say you try to play the Warlock card. Let's say you try to play the Warlock card, Drain Soul. You think, oh, I'm going to deal 3 damages. Well, the problem is the Oh My Yogg goes off. Well, let's say you have a 3-attack minion. Well, if you attack in, you have a Noble Sacrifice. So that can be a really difficult combination to deal with. And if you think your opponent has that really tough of a spot, sometimes it's right to just do nothing and just pass and not attack and not trade, because the risk in some spots of it going is too high. So I'd be looking at the spots of, I think, okay, can I deal with the minion or can I not? So anyways, those are some of the combinations of cards. Next, I'm going to go over some practical examples from games I played on the ladder and show you guys what I did to play around certain secrets. All right, I've got a game where we have a really classic spot to play around Avenge. Start off, I play a lab partner, and they do this play that they do Intrepid Initiate, and then they go Coin Secret. So I go Primordial Studies first, and then when we see this here, we know it's not Oh My Yogg. So we know one secret, it's not there. And I take the lab partner, I believe, or do I take the Steward of Scrolls? And I think part of the reason is I didn't want to play lab partner there because it could be Galloping Savior there. So if I played it into that third card, we would have activated the Galloping Savior, but we then brain freeze it off. So now, and we go face. So now it can only be two secrets. It can be Avenge or Galloping Savior. That's really good to know. We know it is not Oh My Yogg. We know it is not Noble Sacrifice. The Noble Sacrifice would have gone off when we went face. So now our opponent goes this Intrepid Initiate and Righteous Protector. And this is a classic play with Avenge. When our opponent does this kind of play, it's really telling of they're putting the one minion to protect the other minion that they want to save. And what most players would do in this kind of spot, if they're not thinking about secrets, is, you're going to kill off the 1/1, right? So you trade here, you ping, you get a clean kill. But the problem is when it's Avenge, it buffs up this 1/2 immensely, and then it might get even 2 more attack if they play a spell next turn, and we're going to take a lot of damage. So what instead I do is I trade, here you can see here, I think about it, and I'm thinking about, it's probably Avenge. So I feel like I can't kill the 1/1. I would love to kill the 1/2 as well, but I can't do that. So what I do, I ping this. Now, even if they buff up that with the attack, my 1/2 trades into it, and now if the Avenge goes off, I don't trigger the Avenge. So the reality is they would have so much more attack on board. At the end of the day, these are 2 1/1s. It's not very threatening. So we just wait. We don't activate the secret now. They play another secret, which adds another level of complexity on. And here's a spot where I go this Steward of Scrolls here. And you're probably thinking, why did I go Steward of Scrolls, not Refreshing Springwater? Well, they played another secret there. So it could very well be Oh My Yogg. And Refreshing Springwater, very good card. So what I want to do is I have this Bond of Power next turn. So by playing this 4/4 here, I can wait till next turn, activate a potential Oh My Yogg on the next turn, and then go Refreshing Springwater. So you see here, I do this. We get the Oh My Yogg. We see what it is. Philosophy doesn't do anything. We play this. We draw a few cards. Now we see it's Galloping, so we were wrong about the Avenge, but it's still right to play around it. This did throw me off. So this is a spot where I really thought it was Avenge, but what I could have done here is before I went Cram Session, what I could have done is gone ping on the 1/1 and traded into the 1/4. But this does carry its own risks. If I ping on the 1/1 and it is Avenge and it hits the 1/4, their Murloc here, it could be really bad for us, because what could happen is I can't kill this and they could do a lot of damage. So I still think this was the right play, but if you knew for certain it wasn't Avenge here, you would ping off the 1/1 and kill the 1/4, and then you would draw, because killing off the 1/4 here is better to kill off than killing off the 3/4, but killing off the 3/4 pretty good too. So we do this, activates Avenge, now we know, and then I play the deck of Lunacy here. So anyways, you can see they do this big play, but very, very strong turn. And I'm in a weird spot where I am in a spot where I can't, it's hard for me to take risks to play around Oh My Yogg again. And then this next turn, this one's a really interesting one that, so My opponent plays a secret here, and if you were paying attention to the deck tracker, they've had this secret since turn 3. This is often a tell. So what it means is, well, why would they might have played that secret over a hero power or something if it was something like Noble Sacrifice, or if it was Avenge. They would certainly have played Avenge there earlier because Avenge is really good. So what does that tell us? It's probably not Noble, and it's probably Galloping. It's probably they only could have the same secret out once, so when they play this card, it's likely to be Galloping. So that's kind of what I go off here. I end up doing this Apexis Blast here, and I think about, is this Avenge? And I don't think it is. So I end up trading. I also did not think it was Oh My Yogg for the similar reason that I said before. They play this, and now we pretty much know it's Galloping at this point. And then we go... Then from there, I wanted to be as safe as possible here. So I got this Ice Barrier down, got this Counterspell down, and bam. Full clear, super safe, 4 health. We're not dying. They do get this Wand Thief, but if they had gotten a Fireball there, the Counterspell would stop. So you see that game, our opponent had a bunch of secrets. We played around them effectively. We thought about what secrets they were likely to be, and those plays ended up winning us this game. Next, we have a turn where the previous turn, our opponent, we activated Avenge, and we played around Oh My Yogg, so we know this is Noble Sacrifice, and we know this is Galloping. So when you know your opponent is Galloping, you can actually intentionally activate the Galloping in order to kill it. So basically you're saying, instead of having to deal with this problem in the future, I'll deal with it now. So what I do here, as you can see here, normally you go Incanter's Flow first, but I wanted to have enough mana to go Combustion here. Then I go this Incanter's Flow. Now I've played 3 cards. So now my Combustion does 6 damage. And that's enough to kill both of these minions. So I get a real clean play where we kill off both of these minions. And this worked out real nicely. So a spot where if you know exactly what your opponent's secrets are, you can often intentionally activate them in a way that works with your removal. So that's a play you can do there. So here I want to show a spot in a game. My opponent went weapon on 2, and I decided not to play around Oh My Yogg, even though I could. And it happens to trigger Oh My Yogg, but that's not the biggest deal. Because it's a random secret, it makes it less likely it's Oh My Yogg. It's the Libram Paladin typically runs 3 secrets, so it's 1 in 3. But I thought in this spot I considered it to be worth the risk. I didn't want to play around it because if I play around it, then in future spots, an Oh My Yogg can be very brutal. So then here I decide to play into Avenge. I trade this off, and when it's Avenge, in theory, it's really bad. But I have the ace in the hole, I have the Fireball in hand, so I trigger this Avenge, and then I get the Coin Fireball here. So this is a spot where I intentionally triggered my opponent's secret, knowing that I had an answer. So this was a good spot to trigger secrets, where sometimes you don't want to do it because you don't have the answer, and you can just get annihilated because you didn't have a plan. So I had a plan, I was ready, so I was like, okay, it's worth the risk here. Play some stuff here. And here's a spot where I can see there, I immediately went Refreshing Spring Water. There is a risk that they have a second Oh My Yogg. Some lists are running 2 Oh My Yogg, some are not. But the fact that they've already had 1 Oh My Yogg makes it less likely it would trigger this turn. So because of that, I took the risk there. I didn't think it was worth it to play around it. But then here, a natural play would be to do some sort of ping play, but I didn't want to do that because it risks if I ping one of their 1/1s, it could be Avenge here, and Avenge is typically a 2-of, and because we already have hit the Oh My Yogg, it makes it more likely it's Avenge. Right now, it's most likely Avenge or Galloping. And you can also see I didn't play Astromancer there for 2 reasons. One, putting Astromancer in my deck will nullify some of the minion effects. But on top of that, that would have been our third card there that we played, and that would have activated Galloping Savior. So as you can see there, I held back the Astromancer there. So you can see there, I pinged there intentionally, knowing that if it was Avenge, it's actually very good for us because we go Devolving Missiles. I go Devolving, and then I go this play. So now we know it's Galloping, but I did also another play where I only did 2 minions. So now is a turn where I might intentionally try and trigger Galloping. Hey guys, hope you enjoyed that video. In addition to normal deck features or deck guides, I do make some more educational improvement videos like this to make you a better player. I highly recommend my one on the most important skill in Hearthstone, Value Judgments. It's a great video to kind of give you a frame of how to make decisions in Hearthstone. Just sort of the theory behind it, as opposed to just sort of saying, oh, I think it's this, to know what is actually going on in the mind of players and why they make great, like why when you see top players make decisions, why do they make the decisions that they make. So check that video out, but I hope you guys enjoyed this and hope to see you soon.